This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and my guest for today is Ruston Miles, who is the founder of Bluefin, the CEO of Payfactory, and a person who has been working and thinking about online security, well, basically forever. In this must-listen-to conversation, Ruston and I talk about Bluefin and his path to creating this advanced security company. But then we move right into why cybersecurity is so important today for higher education. The bottom line of this is that institutions like this are extremely juicy targets because their systems are typically less advanced, but they hold a ton of personal data as well, like health records. And the entry points in higher education are everywhere because they're basically like whole cities, right, in themselves. They had things like restaurants, gyms, theaters, donations, ticketing, and sports events, and much more. Ruston and I then talk about what can we actually be doing. Universities and higher education should be getting serious about encrypting and tokenizing their data to protect all of their systems and their students. They should also be training their students and faculty about the risks related to it because, at the end of the day, if one student or one faculty member leaves the door open, that means everyone is vulnerable. We then move on to talking about what the practical tools are and the systems can be about, that you should be using today. Things like authentication of users with a zero trust model, or using multi-factor or two-step authentication. Because these systems and layers really make a difference when it comes to making sure that you keep people out that shouldn't be in. We then move on to another option that Ruston believes is really great to consider, which is transitioning to cloud systems, because these cloud-based systems are sometimes safer than software maintained by a university because of the standards, the access controls, and other factors that they provide. And then finally, we round out and tie our conversation in a bow talking about the dark web and specifically what it is and why you need to be aware of it. And remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. So if you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. Now, without further ado, I give you Ruston Miles. Hello, Ruston. How are you today?
Doing great. Nice
Excellent.
to see you. And Denver looks great in the background there, I guess.
I wish this was Denver. That'd be really sweet. I wish I had this office in Denver. Fantastic. Ruston, as we always do, I'd love to, first of all, tell me where you're sitting, and then I want you to kind of properly introduce yourself as the founder of Bluefin and whatnot.
Sure. I'm sitting in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. This is a real background. We're in my house, in my office here. Founded Bluefin in Tulsa, 2002. So 20-year anniversary here. And was founded in Tulsa, but we are now headquartered in Atlanta, and I have offices in Ireland and other places as well. But that's where I'm at today. Just getting cold. It was 80 degrees yesterday and 27 last week. So we're back and forth.
I was just going to say, like, I see, like, you can kind of see there's like a fan going on. I was like, is it hot in Oklahoma? Because there's a cold front that just came through here, and it's serious. Like, it's cold.
I decided to wear the coat, and I said, if it's going to be 80 degrees, and I'm going to wear a coat, I better have the fan on. So I can turn it off if it's bugging, but.
No, not at all. It's fantastic. I love it. But so tell us, we're here to talk about cybersecurity in the higher ed space. Tell me, like, and what I teased out was something that I saw from your company putting out there, something like, close to 2,000 attacks over the last 4 or 5 years, many of those in higher ed, lots of data either compromised or lost. Can you put on the table maybe a little bit more specifically, the scope of the problem of, what this looks like for higher ed these days.
Yes. And thankfully, we had, when we started the company, we just had a different brand, Bluefin, right? It wasn't creditcardmerchantservices.com, cheaper devices and lower rates. It was a softer brand about security, privacy, service, and these things that drew, nonprofits, charities, higher education, high school education, and these kinds of institutions. So it was in our DNA for such a long time. And it really turned out to be a good thing that we did that, because we went ahead and we created this thing called point-to-point encryption. We were the first in North America to do that, first to do tokenization, the way that we did it. So we were very front on the side of security, and that was really serendipitous, because the higher education institutions that we were dealing with and serving became extremely rich targets over the last 10 years, because it's not just card data, it's personal data, it's health data, because lots of them have health systems attached to them as well. I won't call them out, but we all know those universities, great systems. And so you've got this one area where you're able to really perfect a hack, really compromise a lot of vulnerable data, and then go sell that on the dark web. Maybe you're only getting $80 for a card swipe, but you might be getting hundreds or $1,000 for a complete package that you're buying in order to go perform an identity takeover on an individual. So because of that, we saw a lot of hacks, breaches starting to happen in universities and higher education, which then really, and again, not only was it an attractive area, but the cost per record to recover from those breaches was significant. And then also taking the fact that universities aren't like a network of shoe stores where it's like, hey, you breached my credit card data, but next year I forgot your name of the company and I see a sale, so I'm going to go back in for cheap shoes. I mean, your university is, sports and, your diploma and people that you've met along the way and the people that you want to help that are on the way. It's there's a lot of loyalty there. And so that relationship is even more valuable in that sense. And so we really saw a lot of universities needing to figure out how to protect all these kinds of data. And we were just prepared to serve them because we had been doing it already. So I think that's where you saw the character arc at Bluefin really spin up here over the last 10 years. And also a good thing for us is that these higher education folks are really smart. So, when I get up and give a talk, or we give a fairly heady understanding of encryption, tokenization, the whole value proposition, the network segmentation, and how it all works, not only did they get it, but they promoted it amongst themselves, which that collegial interpromotion is something that doesn't happen in the secular sort of commercial world where, maybe I have to keep a competitive advantage and maybe I have to do this. Like, no, so it was a lot of really interesting things there came together for us kind of to be the leader, several hundred D1 universities and of course, hundreds and hundreds of other kinds of educational institutions. But it kind of came together like that.
Fantastic. I got to be honest that you just made the problem even scarier than I thought it was, which I think that's actually a really good thing. Where to start? Because you actually kind of opened up a box that I didn't expect to go to today, which was, if I am the student, if I'm the professor, if I'm the, the learner at these institutions, let's start there. Like, what is it that I should be, in your opinion, looking for, or maybe looking out for, or working, to sort of think about myself so that I'm, can I prevent this? Am I just inevitably vulnerable because of the institution, or is there something that I can do to maybe prevent this or be aware of it? Hi, I'm jumping into the conversation real quick to ask you a very simple, quick favor. If you are enjoying what you're listening to right now, if it's interesting, if it's entertaining, if you're pulling away value, if you're learning something, whatever the case may be, do me a favor and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. If it's on your phone, if you're listening on a computer, whatever it is, just take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe. It helps us. You'll never miss an episode, and everybody wins. And if you really like this content, a lot, come on over to eLearn Magazine, throw your email address in there and subscribe there as well for other great content around our blog posts, around the events we play, and of course, this podcast as well. Thank you very much. And now back to the show.
So I'll answer that in three quick parts. And the first one will just make it a little even more scarier for you if I can just do that. Just kidding. But these universities aren't just the educational institution themselves. They're a whole city. There's restaurants and there's gyms and there's donations and ticketing and theatrical ticketing and sports and fines and tuition and all these kinds of things in this ecosystem, parking, whatever it might be, that are taking in payments. And oftentimes when you'd see a breach that brought in a university's name, it may have just been a vendor on campus that the university contracted with. So what we started going in and saying, it's your brand at risk here, and it's your students who you have a fiduciary responsibility to protect as well, right? Responsibility to protect. So that's really where we came in and said, look, there's going to be dozens or hundreds of different point of sale vendors and card systems and healthcare systems on your campus, but you need to lay down the law and say they all have to be point-to-point encrypted and they have to be tokenized. And so that's where our company really started to see a lot of growth, because the universities would go to each software vendor behind each one of these. The software vendor behind a restaurant is totally different than the one behind the gym, right? So they go to each one and say, look, you've got to be encrypted and tokenized by X date. The ticketing systems, et cetera, same. And so they kind of went out there. So I guess my point is that a lot of the major universities, I mean, all the ones I've heard of, are doing this now. I mean, you'd have to be pretty late to the game, in my opinion, and pretty lazy-minded to be this far. And I hope no one's listening and take umbrage to that. But at this game, to say we haven't taken it seriously enough to have this stuff baked in and built in. They might not be 100% adoption throughout the university because they're little metropolitan areas that constantly grow with new vendors and things. But I think that from what we've seen in a lot of the hard work that we've seen other folks like our company out there doing, that it's not as scary as it sounds, because they have been mining it behind the scenes. But to answer your question directly, what can we be doing? We talk about, hey, the universities, higher education, they need to be mining, encrypting and tokenizing the data and protecting their systems. But the students and faculty, that is where most of the attacks happen in any business or any entity, is their access credentials. Hey, the system's secure, but the human with the login clicked on something they shouldn't have clicked on. Bad guys hacked in, got their username and password, and they're in the system. Doesn't matter how thick your walls are and how great your lock is in the bank, but if somebody's got the key or the combination, it's opening right up. So you can only do so much to protect against humans. And so enforcing multi-factor authentication, these kinds of things where, the aggravating thing where you got to do an app or send back a text or whatever it is you have to do, as frustrating as that is, it really helps protect, because that one time that you clicked on the PDF you shouldn't have and the bad guy got in, the next time the bad guy will have to do an authentication, which requires them to have your cell phone, which they don't have. So it really stops these things from expanding into massive scale breaches to just like, a point in time issue. So I think that that is good. And we like to talk about education. Awareness is important. But at the end of the day, if you got a full-time hacker's job, in some other country, full-time job, and that's all they do year-round for 10 years of their life is figure out how to get in, we're really not going to protect it with an awareness program with somebody who only deals with a card, very, very often. So we have to have a zero trust model almost, where we protect, we enforce multi-factor or two-factor authentication, and then we also secure the data in that way.
What about, so I'm going to take us to, one of the talks that I know is happening. It's either tomorrow or the next day at EDUCAUSE here, which is like, I think it's titled something like, how do you tame the ranch? Because so much is in the cloud now. So many vendors are, universities are connecting so much of their data to the cloud, those kinds of things. But, if I am a student, if I'm a learner, especially in higher ed, my most often interaction is, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it may not be, it's either with the LMS or it's with the, the student information service that runs that, those vendors that do like my cafeteria and those kinds of things as well. And so quite often what I'm sure many people do is like, they'll pause that two-factor authentication or those kinds of things. Is there, are there lesser evils in this, or is it like, at the end of the day, obviously, I know the answer is going to be, yet always, you should be as secure as you possibly can, but are there lesser evils?
Yeah, great point. In that, first of all, let's go to cloud. So in the beginning, everyone's like, oh my goodness, cloud is going to open it and the hackers are going to be able to get to it a lot easier around the world, access and all that kind of stuff. But what was interesting about that transition is that when you go to a cloud service, you've got one single vendor who has to abide by all sorts of privacy things and security standards and audits and all the things they have to do in order to touch cards or deal with health data and all these things. And so you've got this cloud service system that's gone through that, and it's actually probably more safe than having that software at a university that may not be going through those same continual audits and those kinds of things. So cloud, and sometimes depending on is actually safer, and oftentimes those cloud systems most of the time are taking full advantage of tokenization and encryption because they don't want to put themselves at risk. To answer your question about the lesser evils, absolutely, we should never give a student or a faculty person who has access to these systems, even if they turn off or pause two-factor authentication, that kind of thing, and the bad guy gets in and gets around it, they should never have access to wholesale private information, right? They might be able to go in there and find a record and hit the refund button and do something nefarious, or see the last 4 digits, or maybe get your home address, a little bit of information, but they should never get wholesale information. Just, I'm going to download all credit cards now. So within the systems, and I know this, I'm also on the PCI Board of Advisors for this is the Security Standards Council that Visa, MasterCard, American Express, JCB, China Union Pay have put in place in order to set the standards for audits and assessments for payment security. So I happen to know that all those systems have this access control and permissions where that data just simply is not even accessible to the person that has no need for it. So we always say, if you don't need to store it, if you don't need to use it, don't store it, store a token. And if you don't need access, don't give access. You always have to, deny all and approve as little as possible. The interesting thing when I say that, and when folks look at, a breach or something that happened at a university or a business, it might be that someone breached the network defenses. They got in where they shouldn't have got in, right? They got into the bank. But if the data is valuable, yeah, it's bad. Somebody got in, they got to look around, but they couldn't see, download, take the card data. So really, what's the real value of it other than, bad press?
So take me through, you're almost, I feel like you're almost painting a nicer picture than where we're at today. I guess, because we see some of these hacks that are happening. I live in the city of, in Mexico City, and, recently there was just a huge hack that I think it was like 6 terabytes of data that was revealed about, the military and the government, those kinds of things. I'm kind of trying to think from the institutional perspective. If I'm a university, what am I really worried about? What are the key things that, you've already put some of the sort of just standard things on the plate. Like, what are the forward-looking things in terms of the next, 6 months, the next year, whatever, that I should be putting in place, or I should be worried about, or I need to have a mitigation strategy for, those types of things?
So a lot has been done over the last decade, and a little bit in the prior, to protect card payment data. And that's because that data is so easily monetizable. You can steal that card number and immediately sell it on the dark web tonight. And someone will buy that and go use that. So it's real monetizable.
And so for people, before you continue, for people who may be a little bit more novice, explain dark web. Like what, I think I get it.
So these are, access points behind, onion routers where you're able to get to areas that other folks can't get, that the government might not be able to see, that's not directly accessible through Google or something right here. So these are areas where you're able to conduct communication that's probably encrypted and untraceable with buyers, somewhere probably, overseas that are going to take that. That's what the hackers are doing. And then they sell it back to fraudsters, and then they go commit fraud on websites or in person. And so a lot of folks, confuse fraud and hacking. Fraud is just someone who's buying that data and using it. The hackers are the ones that are getting it. And it's a little it's a dark economy with two different looking people and two different, probably actually, just very different groups. But to put that back, so card payments was so easily monetizable that's where all the activity and hacking and fraud was happening for so long. And so people spent a lot of time, universities included, securing that, and they have implemented things in large scale. That's why you don't see as many credit card data breaches in higher education. So what happens there is the hackers still got to eat, fraudsters still got to get paid. So they're like, let's go ahead and move it over to what's the next valuable thing, which is personally identifiable information, social security, EINs, date of births, addresses, phone numbers, information, email addresses that they can go to commit identity hacking and identity theft. And so that stuff can be pretty valuable. It's not as quick and easy to just go use that data. You got to have a pretty sophisticated fraudster that knows how to pull that together, but they're willing to pay more for that kind of record. And my point in that is that I think is the next evolution in security. So you're talking about the government there that breached the wholesale data, that's a lot of just personal data.
Right.
Another government state, actor probably could use that for other kinds of nefarious purposes. Sometimes it's just to make the government look bad. So they'll do that. Hey, we got your data, to fear uncertainty and doubt between countries and whatever it is they do. But when it gets to like that commercial hacking, you don't usually see that. It's more directed around where they can connect data to go commit fraud with it. But there are there's three major areas of why folks would hack, in my opinion. I'm sure you could find several others, and I know that there are. But you got sort of the state-funded actors that are out there, just kind of doing whatever they're doing to get the information on the other team. And then you've got denial of service, and that's one that really doesn't come up very often. And that's where you just, for some reason, want to go shut someone down, get their data, mess up their world, lock their system, whatever it is. But it's not commercially oriented as far as like, I want to go monetize this data. It might be commercially oriented in the way that you want to ransomware it, so you're like, I'm holding your data and I'll give it back to you. And if you don't pay me, I'm going to give it to somebody else. So there's that. But then there's like the traditional stuff that we've seen with card data, which is getting the data and then monetizing it immediately. So I think that's where those are the three. My point being that in higher education has spent, and I know because I've been working with them all, a good deal of time getting that card stuff protected. And so I do see a threat out here for PHI, health data and personal data. And that's where what you see at Bluefin is we took our systems and we said, okay, we're doing really great at cards. And we'd go into a healthcare system. They're like, we just love Bluefin. You protect 100% of 10% of our problem. This card data is only about 10%. So we had to take our systems and say, okay, Social Security is different than a card number, but really not that much. How do we go ahead and apply this to other important data elements? And I think that's where universities ought to be looking at companies like Bluefin and others to say, how can we protect this other data? Final point on that is, there's big privacy fines. GDPR is putting millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of fines over in Europe that's just privacy, nothing to do with card data. Then you see the California Privacy Act and other states adopting that, CCPA. So we're going to start seeing fines handed out in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars just for breaching someone's name and email address and social security number here. We don't see that as much right now in the States, but it's coming.
Take me a little bit further down that rabbit hole, because my understanding of GDPR, the California law, some of the other ones that are on the table right now is stewardship of the data about, who owns it, who services it, who's a controller of it. But there's also protective measures in those as well that, if a breach happens, you're liable for the breach, even if, for instance, I'm just thinking, we, as you said in the beginning of the conversation, at the end of the day, the human is still the most fallible, right? We still know that like somebody loses a laptop, USB key, whatever it is, right? That's a tremendous amount of liability in that regard. Like, take me down that hole a little bit further.
I think the identification of responsibility is for the assignment of blame. They did quite a bit of work there, right? And the assignment of blame is the assignment of fines, and the assignment of fines is revenue and protection, so they can do their job and get paid for it as a government. I don't know, call me cynical. But when you read it and it's set up, there are fines if you get it wrong. And there's a lot of frustration that kind of went around, probably still goes around, where it's here's who's responsible here's your fines. Don't get it wrong, but we're not going to tell you how to get it right. So some of them would say, hey, if we go follow HIPAA, or if we go follow PCI standards, and it's like, yeah, if you get it wrong, we're going to go look if you had due diligence and you took responsibility, you did all the right things, and we'll make a decision. So it's still kind of gray. It's like, if I do this, am I safe? And I think that, these privacy regulators ought to really make sure that they think, and I'm sure they are, if someone rolls up in a tank in front of the university and says, give me your credit cards, like, give it to them. Roll out the cards, give the data. Human life and these things are far more important than these data elements. And so that's unreasonable for these institutions to have protections against unreasonable kinds of threats. But should they tokenize and should they follow the standards for, the industry standards for card data? Yes. And I think that's where you're seeing, you see the assignment of responsibility, assignment of blame, assignment of fines, and then, I guess you almost have to like build up from it. Are you following industry best practices, standards? Are you being audited? Do you have third parties look at your systems? All these things build a case where it's like, hey, look, we got breached and it really wasn't our fault, or it was irrational for us to have had the level of protection it would have taken to protect that. And I see that they're maybe happening over here with CCPA. Again, it's all coming together, and we'll see what happens. But they're passing out fines, and they're big. And when you look at like the GDPR ones, it's, I don't know, I think it's like 4% of your revenue, but it's like global revenues.
Right. So, yeah. No, they can be, they can be fantastically expensive. I totally get that. And it's a very, I think it's both reasonable and, it's a response to, the non-response to security, that we saw for quite a while now. Has the balance tipped the other way, in terms of, I guess you can't be over secure, but, as the balance tipped the other way in terms of, it's a little too much, or has this restricted, I guess, as someone who's been developing things for the last decade or more, actually you said 20 years, sorry, apologize. Has it restricted your ability to grow and expand, or, put new things on the market, or, those types of things?
Great question. Regulation can stymie innovation. I mean, it's just no doubt about it, right? One of the things that the payment card industry, and I say PCI, payment card industry, came together, meaning Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and the brands, card brands. They came together really early on after a couple of the big breaches and created an industry body to create standards, assessments, audits, all these different things, requirements, et cetera. And what that did, they're trying to self-regulate, right? So that they didn't, if you don't take care of it, government's going to do it. And the government is not a bunch of, business and security and credit card payment experts. I mean, that's what we are. That's what we've done. Spent our 2 decades learning and doing all that. That's what we do, and they do other things. So if we don't do our job, they're going to have to come in and do it. Mm-hmm. And so very much, I think that's that way for the cards. We step out of the card paradigm over to PII and PHI, health and personal information. It really gets interesting because that doesn't fall under industry standards because it touches every industry in a variety of different ways. I know you have HIPAA, but a little bit different there. We have not seen regulation stop and stymie our innovation. And in fact, even though we're on the side of, Ruston, you're on the side of security, so it's probably helped you quite a bit. But I would say it's always been, our direction to make this as frictionless as possible. Hey, there's a lot of pain coming. You got to follow these 335 requirements. Here's a way to make that easier for you. So that's the way we've always been selling and solutioning, is to be the easier option to still remain in compliance and be secure. And so I think those same kind of concepts, and that's what we're as a company doing for the personal and health data, is the same thing with our product Shield Connects and Decryptics and other things, and pulling this value out of the payment stuff and applying it to these other areas. I think it's too soon to tell whether or not these domestic regulations will affect innovation because they're still finding their first big case. I think they have their first big case, but they like to have their first big case, their first big fine, and the watchdog thing, and then the rollout, and then they start to press that out. So I have not seen it stymie innovation yet in our world, the privacy side of it. But who's to say what's to come? I'm just talking about to date.
Can I ask what the big first case is? Is it the one that just happened in Los Angeles?
So what was it? Salesforce, one of their clients. I'm sorry, I'd have to get you this, but it was the name of the merchant, right? As the named, and then it's they were using the Salesforce system. So really, it's sort of a way to kind of.
Okay, well, that brings me
the biggest SaaS provider you could possibly find and try to make a big case out of it. That's and I haven't followed up. I have to be honest with you in the last couple of months on it. It might be something I should have done before this, but it'd be interesting to see where that case is at.
Well, that kind of then brings me to an interesting point here in that, so we know that so much education has moved online. I mean, that was an inevitability that's happened over the last 2.5, 3 years here. It's here to stay. That's something that everyone's talking about in the higher ed place. Some universities and some education programs are completely online now, right? Like the entire diploma program is delivered online. And a huge part of that is now turning to something that we call micro-credentialing. And again, here at EDUCAUSE, that's going to be I know that there's at least 4 or 5 presenters on that topic. So they're connected to things like Salesforce, to LinkedIn, to Microsoft, to other development programs, those kinds of things. Is there anything new or unusual that we would need to be thinking about in that regard, or is that just another expected evolution of these, as you said, these metropolitan areas, basically, of these systems that are connected together, and they need to be properly secured to that tokening?
I think it's fantastic because it's kind of like single sign-on or SAML or one of these things, micro-credentialing. Because if you've got somebody that has to log into 12 systems to do their job, they're going to have 12 different passwords that all have different timeouts, and this one's at 30 days, and I'm going to add a 1 to this one and a star to that one, and I'm going to have post-it notes, and it becomes an aggravating part of their life, and it's really not all that much more secure, right? But when you have some of these more areas where we can concentrate and have someone a company's whose job it is to credential, to authenticate users, to maybe look at the thing and say, hey, it's been this much time, or your IP address has come up. I'm going to reach out to you now, but you're in a safe zone, so I'm not going to reach out to you then. And you have that now. You have vendors in an ecosystem that are making life easier for these people and more secure from an authentication perspective, rather than leaving it up to willy-nilly every one of the software vendors that they have to integrate with. And so I think you wind up with a better standard process that's both more secure and more convenient.
Ruston Miles, you're the founder of Bluefin, and we've been talking about cybersecurity higher ed. I have one last question for you here that I hope is not a curveball, and I hope that you don't groan too much. But where does this, where do things go in your mind as we find ourselves more and more in the metaverse, in virtual reality systems, those kinds of things? Is there anything different about that? Or is there anything, as we attach more and more of our lives to these virtual environments, as a learner or as a professor, as an institution, or is it still the same game or not?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the mechanics behind, me giving you money in the first are going to remain the same behind the scenes. Our interface, will be different. The way that we interact might be different. The way that we make the sale or the handoff, all of these different things, I think but I believe that the infrastructure behind it will remain the same for a while. A lot of folks talk about biometrics and the fact that, I might be interfacing with a system that can take care of, finger or face or eyes or things like this. My problem with those kinds of technologies is, until we can prove that we can't compromise a 16-digit number, a credit card number, that we, by the way, can just give the cardholder a new one. I can't give you a new set of eyes. I just can't, not God. So I think that's to me, using those as authenticational things are really, we need to really prove that things are kind of secure before we get to that. So putting that to the side, I think it's a lot of the same critical things: authentication, tokenization, end-to-end encryption. We see in WhatsApp, our signal, I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, we're completely integrated, encrypted throughout. I think those kinds of things, a tokenization, meaning we're not going to store the data, we're going to store a token instead. I think those things are all still fundamentally the payment infrastructure blocks behind the metaverse right now. I do think that the metaverse is going to radically change the interaction for commercial interaction, and et cetera. But I think you're still a person in a place with plastic on your face, rather than sitting 2 feet in front of you. So which is just a far better experience. I think the plumbing, I think it's going to stay the same for a minute.
Mm. Well, either that or you and I are going to have to look like Tom Cruise, Minority Report, got the eyeballs.
That's right. He's in the bath. The milk bath.
Ruston, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day in Oklahoma there to talk with me about cybersecurity today. Really, really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Ladek. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you again for listening to the eLearn podcast. I just wanted to take one last moment here to ask you to, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, if you had fun, if you liked the guest, if you wanted to learn more, if you feel like sharing this with somebody, do me a favor. Hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. Just do it right now before the episode ends. Hit subscribe, and that way you'll never miss an episode as we publish them every week. Thanks.